Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Keep Indiana Learning's book study on UDL and Blended Learning by Katie Novak and Catlin Tucker. My name is Melissa Wally, and I'm a digital learning coach with Keep Indiana Learning. If you are brand new to our book study, welcome. And if you've been with us all along the way, we're happy to have you back. And today's episode is focusing on chapter 9. And in fact, it is the final chapter of the book, which is a little bit bittersweet, I think, for all of us. Chapter is titled Zooming into Family and Community Engagement, which personally spoke to me, but I think I say that every time. To introduce myself, before we get started, I work for Hanover Community Schools in Cedar Lake as an educational technology specialist and tech coach. I've been in education for 25 years. Joining me for our book study is my partner in crime, Diana Knox, as usual. And today's guest is Nicole Nelson, one of our wonderful Keep Indiana Learning digital learning coaches. And thank you for joining us, Nicole, as we tie a bow on our book study today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I was excited to do this chapter as well. And I'm Nicole Nelson, like she said. I'm a technology integration specialist at Lewis Cass Schools. I've been in education now for 24 years and have spent roughly 21 of those in grades pre-K through middle school. And this is my third year as the technology integration specialist. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're excited to have Nicole back. This is what, your second time with us, Nicole? You did another chapter with us earlier, right?
Yeah.
So it's always fun when we get to do that. My name's Diana Knox. I am from Brazil, Indiana, and I'm a technology instructional specialist for Clay Community Schools. This is my 7th year focusing on educational technology and my 25th in education. In my former life, I was an English and Spanish teacher, so doing a lot of things with the arts. And I'm so glad to be here with Melissa and Nicole today. It really actually seems hard to believe. Melissa's right. It's very bittersweet that this is the last chapter in this book. It's kind of become my constant companion this semester as we've had this schedule of reading and planning and working together. But I really have enjoyed taking this deeper dive into UDL and blended learning these past few weeks. So without further ado, let's just dive right in. Melissa?
Yeah, so the first chapter, the titles of the chapters just always get my attention, and then even just like the subheadings. So it starts with this title, it's about more than roosters. And right away I'm thinking, where are we going here? And so they start talking about this children's book called Zoom. And I remember that book, but I couldn't place it. And then as they start describing the book, I remembered it from back when I taught kindergarten. And it's a book, and it shows like a close up, and you think you're looking at a mountain range, but then it zooms in and it's actually a rooster. And then you think you're looking at a rooster, and then the next page it zooms in more and it's actually a farm. And then you turn the page and it zooms in more and it's actually not a farm, it's like a farm playset. And it goes on and on and on. And what you think you're seeing, there's actually much more to it. And the whole idea of that is that what you think you see, there's always a lot more to it. And so we can relate that to what we do in our work and how we work with students, that we can't just look at what we're seeing, that when we have our class in front of us and we have these students in front of us, we can't just say like, okay, it's these kids and this is what they bring to us and this is what we're going with. We have to zoom out. We have to look at the big picture because we're actually working with much more than what they're bringing to the table on a daily basis. We're not just working with the students in our classrooms, but actually with their parents and their family members and their situations of what's going on at home, and even our communities we serve. When something happens in the community that affects the classroom environment that affects the families, that affects the students, that affects everything. And then as I thought about that, it made me think of my work and how I do often remind myself as I work with teachers to always look at the big picture. It's not just the teachers, it's the entire school, it's the administrators. How is that going to affect, one decision? How is that going to affect everything? And looking at different viewpoints. So zooming out as you are working in any role is so important. So in this case with families, we can involve parents. We use that term often, parent involvement. And I think that's a common one. Like, parent involvement is important. We want to involve parents, and we want to have open houses, and we want to make sure that we're involving our parents and our PTOs. But how can we engage parents? And that's something that it spoke to me as I read that part. Like, what can we do to truly create those relationships and bring them into our children's education? And that's really what's important. So it might look different for different students in different family situations. Not all families look the same. So being flexible as we understand different individual situations for different individual families is critical. And so we need to make sure that we're inviting parents to engage in different ways, what works for them, not just one standard situation. And we want to make sure we're welcoming people into the schools, whether it's in person or virtually or through whatever means fits their needs and makes them comfortable so that they can engage with their children's education. And then those opportunities are what will help grow our partnerships, keep that line of communication open, and help their children ultimately learn.
Yeah. The next part of the book then dove into kind of the barriers to that involvement and that engagement that we all want. And so how to kind of understanding what are the roadblocks in our way as we look to bring parents into what we're doing in the classroom. And so the three barriers that they talked about were the silent divide. Often parents and community members feel that their voices aren't heard or maybe even aren't welcome. And so ways that we can combat that would be like offering multiple opportunities to engage that are more relevant and authentic and meaningful for what's actually happening in the classrooms, or maybe thinking about ways that like the ways that we adjusted our lessons during COVID, when we offered, videos and Google Meets and things like that. Like, how can we use some of those tools that we embraced during COVID to engage our families and offer them multiple ways to engage, not just on open house night or on back to school night. And then another one of those barriers was limited responsiveness. And so that just meant that some families feel that schools aren't responsive to authentic needs of families. That they were saying that, back to school nights and open house nights sometimes limit parents who can't make it on that one evening or can't make it if they work the night shift. And so trying to find ways to provide asynchronous opportunities for parents to engage, and then maybe even getting outside community involvement, reaching out to maybe the nursing homes or the banks or the libraries and things like that to build that relationship between the community and the school as well. And then the final barrier that they talked about was institutional barriers. And those are just sometimes things that are beyond the school's control, things that the state tells us that we need to be doing that we can't get around. And just kind of explaining and making parents aware of that sometimes there are things that we just have to kind of work with and roll with the punches and do the best that we can in those kinds of situations.
I enjoyed that section on the barriers that happen because I think it is something that maybe it's easy to think that those are challenging to deal with. And so maybe sometimes I feel like in my classroom, I didn't address that enough, and I should have in hindsight. But hindsight is a powerful thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of us learned a lot from COVID, and how to embrace the challenges and offer multiple options for people.
Yeah. Flexibility, super key. So the next piece of the chapter went in and it talked about shifting the focus from what families don't have to what they do have. And I think that is something that it's so easy sometimes to get caught up in the negatives and thinking about all of the challenges facing our families, what resources they do or don't have. So if we focus on the positives and what they do have, what can they do with those things? So I loved the analogy and the comparison, which they're so good. These authors have been amazing at this entire book, these real life perspectives. So the Apollo 13 analogy. And so when Houston, we have a problem, then the people back on the ground in Houston accumulated, they had this box of everything that they had on the spaceship to them to address the challenge that they faced. And so they focused on this box of possibilities and what can they do with it. And so I think that is a great perspective to take in. And especially when we shifted to that remote learning in 2020, thinking about what the families had available to them to do learning. And learning wasn't going to look like what it would in the classroom. And too often, I think we tried to maintain that classroom feel and look, and that just isn't possible. And I think we know that now. And again, that's that hindsight thing. Everybody was doing things with the very best of intentions. We had never been faced with something like this. But now we can see that we focus on the flexibility of it and meeting the students and the families where they are and what do they have at home available to them to accentuate and to help them achieve their learning. And so I think that looking at those resources and tapping into that unconventional piece, do they have the means? Do they have somebody that can go take a walk with them around the neighborhood and make some observations and record them? Do they have an adult helper at home who could maybe help them with cooking so that they could work on measuring and mixing and following directions? I love, some of our teachers have talked like in art or PE, they will turn their snow day lessons into going out and making a snowman. Or doing something active. And it is active learning. It is outside the traditional means, but it's making the students aware and the families aware that they have things available to them that can help accentuate the learning.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa, you're muted, my dear.
I was convinced I wasn't going to do that this time.
You know what? I almost did it, but then I'm the dingbat that didn't advance our slides to go through like at the normal. I was just listening and engaged, and so just got the one random slide there forever. So it's good.
It's all good. It's all good. Okay, so thank you for that reminder. So we've talked about like thinking back to the flexibility that we had when we were shut down in 2020. And thinking back to that, we had, because it was so necessary, we had this importance of parent partnerships and family partnerships at that time. And when that happened, many schools had these material pickups. There were options to pick up books or art activities, hands-on projects. And I'm thinking back to what I saw at that time. My own kids were older at that time, but not just in my district, but other districts, that some teachers had like these virtual art projects or craft activities where kids would have all the same little craft kits, and then teachers would go online, and it was like they had this online craft time and everybody was making the same craft. And I remember seeing these posts on social media, like this is something that had never been done before. And these partnerships formed, and it wasn't even just like, okay, you get one kit, but you're seeing these things pop up where, oh, you have a young sibling. Well, we'll put in extra materials for you because we know you have a young sibling. So we're going to involve little brother, a little sister, and you're just seeing these siblings joining in the activities as well. And the break from the typical work was such a welcome distraction from what was going on, and it was so needed. That time was so troubling, and it was something that just brought the families together and formed those relationships, which strengthens that school-home partnership and just makes it better than when it comes time to have a hard conversation or, have a needed conversation when there's something that's involved at school. And I think all of that is so important. Not that we are going to go back to doing those at-home craft activities, but it's, again, a theme that's been throughout the entire book is the need for that relationship. And I honestly had forgotten about that part of e-learning during the school closures, that material pickup, until I read about it in the book. But it truly was a positive way that parent partnerships were formed. And having that memory, every now and then I get a glimmer of, yeah, I remember that, like all of the tough part of e-learning and the tough part of that pandemic. And then all of a sudden something pops up and I'm like, oh yeah, that was something that was a positive at that time. And it's nice to at least have some positives.
Yeah, I think that there were a lot of positives that came out of a tough situation. Like, oh, maybe we can take this moving forward. Maybe it wasn't such a bad thing that we all had this opportunity. I was teaching STEM at the time, and I sent home kits, little popsicle sticks and rubber bands, and the kids all made catapults and then recorded their observations on Flipgrid. So just different opportunities that we weren't, like you said, able to have in the classroom. So yeah, that was fun. This next part of the book, getting into that, it focuses on creating those relationships with the parents and remembering that parents are our students' first teachers, right? They are doing the best that they can with little to no training. I mean, we're all kind of in that same situation. My husband and I tell our own kids all the time, like, this is the first time that we've done this parenting thing. Like, we're going through this with you. We didn't have cell phones and Snapchat and this and that. Our parents, we don't have that experience of our parents to go to them and say, how did you manage this with us when we were that age? Like, we didn't have that growing up. So we often tell them that, like, we're doing the best we can here. So we want to think about, as educators, how can we help support our parents in that, in what they're trying to do with their students at home, and support what they are teaching them too. Make that partnership between what they're learning in the classroom and how can that carry over. And so thinking about the resources that we offer, I love that the Indiana Learning Lab now has that parent hub where parents can go to find videos and directions and models of all kinds of strategies to support their children from home, from literacy to early literacy to math and all kinds of engagement ideas. So just building that partnership and providing the parents resources, is super helpful for us as educators.
And we have so many opportunities to share what we're doing in our schools and classrooms, and digital tools have made it a role for a school staff member. Even if you have a social media specialist or someone who handles it in your district, teachers can share photos and news through digital newsletters or apps. The importance of sharing the why behind the what is vital to show what students are learning at school. So it's not just pushing out all these photos of look what we're doing, but why are we doing that? Why is it important? Mm-hmm. And so they have a list of questions on page 190, and some of them I thought were really good. But I think it's important to go back to that so parents know, like, oh, they didn't just, like you talked about STEM activities, they're not just seeing how high the cups can stack, but here's why they're doing it. Mm-hmm. what vocabulary words are they talking about when they're doing that? It's hard to just look at a picture and understand, like, why is that so important to what they're doing? What, how is that going to scaffold and build into the higher level standards? So those things are important. And then what also, like it says, what type of parent support would be helpful during that learning unit? So I think those questions on page 190 can kind of guide what you're filtering home to parents as you are communicating with them what's going on in the classroom. Another thing is video. Video will give families an eye into the classroom experience, especially for parents that work. I know when my children were younger, I used to always have this guilt that, like, I knew I could never be that room mom that was always in the classroom because I was spending my time with other people's kids. But I wanted to, and at the time there weren't these apps, and I would have loved to get, all of these pictures and all of these videos. It would have just kind of calmed me a little bit more to have that information at my fingertips. But, and then as you're sending that home, keep in mind though, that accessibility options are important so that all families have the same experience, whether they have a need for closed captioning or translation service. All of that is available for them as well as parents.
Now I almost forgot to unmute. So that is such a good point. And I think thinking about those questions that you mentioned, Melissa, and what parent expertise would be helpful during this project or this unit, that allows us this opportunity to tap into our parents or even our community's funds of knowledge for our parents, because we know that, research tells us that if we have engaged families at home, our students are more likely to be successful. When our community backs and supports our kids and is engaged in what they're doing, and we have communities that are amazing at supporting like the extracurricular pieces, but I think they're also hungry to support the curricular parts of it as well. And anytime that partnership is there, our students are going to reap the benefits from it. So I loved some of the ideas that they shared in this section where she talked about at the beginning of the year, she kind of did a survey to learn what jobs and what interests people had. And so then as she was teaching, she was able to tap into that. So for example, I was thinking back when I was teaching Spanish, that was where I spent a lot of my time. And I talked about authentic Mexican food versus Tex-Mex type food that we get here. And I actually had a student helper who was a native speaker, and her mother made mole and brought it in. And mole is something that a lot of Mexican restaurants around here don't have on their menu, but it's one of my favorite dishes when you can get it well. And so it introduced my students to this authentic connection versus what they have. And so if we can tap into knowledge like that, the example that they mentioned in the book, they were reading, and I always forget the title of the book they were reading. Sorry about that. The Omnivore's Dilemma. And so that allowed them to tap into expertise in the community and bring in people that could talk about farming and nutrition and food production. So if you can tap into community involvement and make a real world application to what you're learning, it's going to be more meaningful to our students. And if they can understand, and that's going to help them make that connection to the why this learning is important. Mm-hmm. And when they can make that connection, our students just are going to reap the benefits from that. So thinking about ways that you can do that in your classroom. And I know that we're going to go back, and that refers back to those institutional barriers sometimes, and the barriers that we have, because it is, you think about the curriculum and the time and all of this. I know that is a challenge that some people would think about. But if you can make a connection along the line somewhere to something, you don't have to do it for every single lesson. But when you start to implement that here and there, it's going to make those real world examples, and it's just going to help our students and our families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, like you said, community members are hungry for that opportunity to get in and make that connection with the students and the families that are in the schools as well. One of the examples that I wrote, the note that I wrote in the book as I'm reading, our first grade group at our school, they call it Camp Skeeter, and it's like the last 2 weeks of school, and they use kind of those surveys that you were talking about and bring in, parents. Every year it's different because depending on the students that they have, each family member's expertise is different. But we have fire trucks out here and farmers, and they bring their animals, and or the kids walk to the library, or they walk across the street to the bank. And it's a fun experience for the students, and I know that the community enjoys that as well. The last kind of strategy for involving parents is to co-construct those learning experiences. So we can implement this in order to help create a partnership for our students' parents, and really tap into their expertise when it comes to their children's likes and dislikes, their struggles, or maybe even the impacts of things that we've modified for them. Did this work? Did this not work? And we can do this by contacting them ahead of time. Often we, get the feedback from them, but hey, this is coming up. How do you, what do you think the best strategy is for your student in order to get the most meaning from this activity? So I thought that was really kind of an eye-opening. Oh, I didn't really think of it that way. So that was underlined in my book as well. Like, think of, contacting ahead of time to kind of prevent problems or prevent issues that might come up, rather than gathering feedback afterwards. So that I thought was really interesting.
Absolutely. I Melissa and I have said this every chapter, but every chapter I feel like it's the best one I've read all the way through. And it's just been such a good building block. So this was another brief chapter, but it was so impactful when you think about moving beyond family and community involvement, which is very surface level, and diving into that engagement piece. Because the more that we can become partners with our families and our communities, the better our students are going to be set up for success. Mm-hmm. And so the other thing is always keeping that UDL lens in mind is that we have to be mindful to provide options. Thinking about barriers that could potentially be in place for our students, for our families, for our community, thinking about translation services, captions, multiple methods of gathering that information and giving all those opportunities. And if we think about all those different things and we create those true partnerships, then it is an amazing thing we're doing for our students. And I know that there's a lot on educators' plates right now. There's a lot on schools and systems plates. But everybody at the heart of it, every time I hear is, are we doing what's best for students? And so we all have these best intentions. And so I think throughout this entire chapter there, or this entire book, even since we're kind of at the end of it, there are so many things that we can take away to look at ways that we can create a bigger impact for our students. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Mm-hmm. So some final thoughts. There are, no matter where you are in your journey with UDL, there is something to be learned from this. Change isn't going to happen overnight. You can't try to do all of it at once. So think about, if you've been with us on this entire journey, think back, pick like one of the chapters that really spoke to you and think about actionable change that you can do with that. Thinking about, the reflection is a piece that we do at the end of every chapter. And we're not going to forget that this chapter, but thinking about what you can actionably do. So here is the reflection for this chapter. There was several good questions, but we settled on this one. Blended learning may include at-home learning. And we talked about some strategies for this within the chapter. How can you collaborate with parents to design learning experiences that are accessible as learners work from home? So thinking about that challenge and that piece of it, what are some things that you can do? Because when we give homework and we want to make it meaningful, and how can the parents be involved and help them? So that's a good thing for us to think about. And then since we are at the end of the book study, this slide has changed just a little bit because there won't be any new chapters in 2 weeks, but all of the chapters are available on YouTube. This is a QR code to the playlist if you have just been joining us today. And the other thing is, if you have been with us on this entire journey, you could also apply for getting your PGP points. And so the web address is there along the bottom of the screen, keepindianalearning.org/PGP. You will fill out a short survey and the certificate would be emailed to you later in the day. And I think everybody will have a chance here in a second, but I think I speak for us all. We've been so grateful for this opportunity to share UDL, blended learning, and our thoughts with you over these last few weeks.
Yeah, this truly was a learning opportunity for me. I hope everybody has enjoyed this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks
This
for
was a fun chapter.
Glad you're here.
And don't forget, next semester, there will be the shift to student-led, which will be another book study led by one of our fellow DLCs, Tim Arnold. So if you've enjoyed this, take part in that one as well. I can't wait to dig into that one.
Yeah, definitely.